Welcome to this lesson about the LAMP framework, how to do advanced analytics. A piece of research that I really like to quote has been done by Nucleus Research already in 2014, so it's actually quite dated. They found that every €1 or dollar or pound spent on analytics earns 13 times that amount in return. That's a huge payoff for analytics. Now, the question is, are we seeing the same? This was, by the way, about business analytics. The question is, are we seeing the same in HR? Well, as you already know by now, when we talk about advanced analytics in HR, there's a problem, there's a challenge. HR is very good at tracking data, at looking at historic data, but when it comes to analytics, there's a problem. Doing correlational analyses, causational effects, predictive analytics, these are hard to do and these don't really happen in HR. And that's also reflected in one of the articles by Sjoerd van de Heuvel, which we used earlier in this course. So we need to break down this wall of Boudreaux. How do we do this? Well, there's a framework that's very helpful in doing so. It's called the LAMP framework. It's a framework with the 4 prerequisites needed to move from reporting to doing actual analytics. And this is what the framework looks like. LAMP is an abbreviation for logic, analytics, measures, and process. First of all, whenever we want to move to doing advanced analytics, we need the right logic. We need an evidence-based approach to doing our research. The second step is having the right measurements. Do we have sufficient data? Do we have the right data that is accurate, that's timely, that's available? We then, with the data, need to do the right analytics, use the right statistical techniques, use the right analytics in order to get the information from the data. And then in order to implement everything, we need the right process from start to finish. We need the right team, we need a data-driven culture, we need to implement our findings, etc. These 4 criteria are very useful. And what I would really like you to do is to take a piece of paper and write down all the criteria for these 4 elements that you need in order to implement analytics at your organization successfully. This can act as a checklist. Let's start with the first step, having the right logic. And when it comes to logic, I would say there's a logic problem in our organization. And this has a few causes. Most popular HR articles that you'll find on the internet are not evidence-based. This is actually one of the reasons why we started AIHR in the first place, because we wanted to spread high-quality, evidence-based information about human resource management. This is still very, very scarce. HR's work is often quite operational. There's not really a push for development, and HR is still failing to become truly strategic and to have a real impact. And that's something we've been talking about for 20-30 years already, since the early 90s, I would say, since Dave Ulrich published his first really influential book about the roles for HR. Thirdly, HR is an emerging profession still and lacks clearly defined competencies. It's very hard, and there's a lot of discussion about what are the competencies that an HR business partner, for example, should have. It's hard to find consensus on this topic. And fourth, HR professionals base their decisions on gut feeling, and that results in the logic problem. And if I had to define, because you're probably now wondering, what is the logic problem? Well, the logic problem is a profound lack of evidence-based practices in HR. This is research from the CIPD from 2017. How frequently do you as an HR professional use these type of evidence to inform business decisions? And the number 1 factor is personal experience. And the number 2 factor is personal experience from colleagues, the judgment of experienced professionals within my organization. Only if we go all the way to the bottom of the list do we see management literature and results from scientific research. HR decisions are very, very rarely evidence-based. So when we start doing analytics, our first inclination is to look at our personal experience. If we want to predict turnover, for example, how do we then predict it? Well, I think people are leaving because of ABC. Well, and that's also, of course, what I've been trying to advocate throughout the course. You should first go to literature, first look, what is the actual logic? What does the evidence say in regards to predictors of turnover, for example, or predictors of expats leaving, or take your pick. This is the core of the logic problem. When we look at the LAMP framework, logic is the first factor. In order to implement analytics effectively, we need logical, evidence-based models. And that's also one of the lessons if you look at the RE Work project, Google's People Analytics initiative. It's in one of the YouTube videos. In one of those presentations, I think it was the head of the People Analytics team, he says what we found time and time again after we did an analysis, that it was already found in literature. So we then switched and first went to literature, looked at the relationships that we could find there, and based on those logical, those evidence-based frameworks, we started doing an analysis. So the first prerequisite of doing a successful analysis is to have the right logical evidence-based model. So logic, logos, of course, the word is the story behind the connections between the numbers. And the logic should be firmly based on literature. That's your starting point. The logic enables you to connect HR with management practices through literature. To wrap this story up, logic is really about the reasoning, the science-based reasoning behind your analysis. That's where you start whenever you want to do predictive analytics. Now, the second criteria is measurement, and that's what I would frame as the measurement problem. HR data is inaccurate. And a good example is, of course, performance. No one really measures manager-rated performance in an accurate way. HR data is also scattered in multiple different systems. HR professionals are not that familiar with things like reliability and validity, and very few organizations are using, for example, a data glossary, where you very accurately define what you measure in your different HR metrics. So HR often fails at producing high quality data, and that's maybe even the bigger problem, and we address this in one of our courses, the Global Data Integrity course. HR fails to think systematically about improving their systems to generate clean data. So that's the second challenge when it comes to the LAMP framework. So what is measures? If we look to the LAMP framework, we know the logic. What is measures? Measures is about getting the numbers right. Data should be reliable, valid, consistent, complete, and timely. And I already mentioned this. Is there in your organization an HR data glossary that is consistently applied? For example, if you measure employee turnover, how do you measure it? We recently had a big discussion in the community. You can measure it by taking the number of people working at January 1st and compare it with the number in December 31 and then deduct the number of new hires. But then how about new hires that started in January but then left in April? How do you count those? Do you include them when you want to count turnover on an annual basis or not? What is then your formula? Well, in Dutch we have a saying that says a fool can ask more questions than 100 wise men can actually answer. And, well, this is me being a fool and just asking a lot of very, very difficult questions that are almost impossible to answer. But you need an answer to them. And if you're measuring it in your organization, you need to have thought about this. If you're very interested in the answer to this specific question, look up the community discussion about this specific topic. The bottom line is that this is just an example for turnover. How about all the different metrics that you have? Are you measuring them in a consistent way, not only in the US, not only in the UK, but also, for example, in India, in China, where you have very different management practices that will have an impact on your data? Thirdly, are your measurements placed in their broader context? Are you just looking at turnover, or are you saying, hey, let's look at unwanted and desired turnover? A metric in itself doesn't say much. You need context in order to interpret your measurement and to know whether something is good or not. And fourth, do we invest in those measurements that really matter? Here the Pareto principle also holds true. Only a few of the metrics account for most of the value. So make sure that your output on those metrics are of high quality. And the criterion for the measurement is measuring the right things the right way. So having the right measures is the second prerequisite to go towards advanced analytics. Now the last two steps are analytics and process. Analytics is about the research design that connects the logic framework that we just spoke about. If we apply this analytics topic to our data, it is also about using the right analysis for our data. For example, and I'll stick to turnover in this case, you can analyze turnover by doing a correlational analysis, by doing a logistical regression, by doing a multiple regression, by doing a survival analysis. So there are a lot of different statistical ways to analyze turnover and to get different insights from your turnover data. So which one should you do, and how do you develop this? Do you develop it internally? Do you have the data science capabilities in HR or in a shared services department? Or do you partner with someone else to get that capability? These are questions that you need to have answered before you can advance to doing advanced analytics. And the criterion here is always, are you drawing the right conclusions from the data? Now the final step and prerequisite is process, making insights actionable. Now, process is about the starting point of your analytics project all the way to the implementation. Do your measurements affect decisions and behaviors? Maybe already when you're measuring them, and I'm referring now to the Hawthorne effect, but also how do you implement your findings? How do you create buy-in from management? Do you present measures and analyses that match their mental models? Or how are you convincing them? Are you deploying things like storytelling, data visualization? That's all part of the process. Another part of the process is the stakeholder management process, which is key to implementing HR analytics, as you know by now. And there's also the change management process. Once you have your findings, how do you then change the mindset in HR or for line managers so they take the results seriously and they take action on it? How do you make your results actionable for others? And a big part of process is to also really implement the logic framework, implementing a data-driven culture, because only if you have a solid data-driven culture in HR, then you'll get the results that you're looking for. So the criterion for the process is, are you able to get the insights that you need, and are you able to implement them and change the organization for the better? So that wraps up the LAMP framework. In summary, the LAMP framework is a very good framework to move from descriptive analytics or from dashboarding to doing actually an analytics project. And whenever you're doing an analytics project, I recommend you to revisit this LAMP framework. Look at, hey, do I have all the components for the right logic? Do we have the right measures when it comes to this specific analysis? Do we have the right analytical capabilities? Do we know what analysis we need? Do we have access to these capabilities? And finally, do we have the right process, starting at the starting point of an analysis all the way far into the implementation? Do we have a strategy to get the results and to implement them also in the longer term? That's the LAMP framework, and from what I've learned, people find this framework very, very useful when implementing advanced analytics in their organizations.